All right, so somebody sent me this article and thought that I would be interested in it, and it turns out that I was quite interested in it, so I appreciate the heads up on this article. It is from mereorthodoxy.com, and it is What Happened When My Church Encountered Negative World. So this was sent to me recently, but it's from February of 2024, and it is addressing Aaron Renn's book, Life in the Negative World, which is, it's not a new book anymore. It's been out for a year now, or a little over a year, but it's really caught on. So this notion that we live in a world where, at least in what Patrick Miller, the author of this article, calls the Anglosphere, or really just Western culture, that we in the early 1900s lived in what Aaron Renn calls positive world, in which the being a Christian, in terms of Christian identity, identifying as a Christian, was a good thing. So that was a positive world for Christianity, wherein people had a positive opinion of Christians. And then we lived in neutral world for a while, up until the early 2000s, or the middle of the second decade of the 2000s, around 2014. And that was where it was okay to be Christian. You could be Christian, you could be Hindu, you could be Muslim, you could be atheist. You do you, and Christianity was kind of on par with every other worldview that was out there. And then in around 2014, it turned into negative world, where the public sentiment turned against Christianity, and to be a Christian, to have Christian morals, is kind of bigoted and judgmental, and how dare you shove your morals down our throats, that sort of thing. Christians need to be more accepting of different worldviews, things like that. So Christians got vilified beginning around 2014 per Aaron Renn's work. Now, I have not read Life in the Negative World. I've heard Aaron Renn speak on the topic, and his book might have more minutia in it, but the idea is not that he doesn't get down into the weeds necessarily. What he's saying is that the general zeitgeist, or the general atmosphere that we live in the Western world, is one in which we've gone through these transitions between positive, neutral, and negative. And then he used, apparently, this church as an example in the book of a church that encountered a negative world. And so here we go. It is the Crossing Church, and this guy, Patrick Miller, apparently is part of that church. And he says that Renn got it kind of right and kind of wrong. And so what's the thesis of what this fella Miller is saying about the Crossing Church? So just a general scope here is, apparently the Crossing Church was involved in a progressive... let's see, we sponsored the festivals. Okay. In 2008, one of our lead pastors, Dave Cover, forged a relationship with a local progressive documentary film festival called True False. The partnership ran deep. We sponsored the festival's yearly charitable cause. So each year, the festival got to choose a charitable cause. Not sure what that was. Church members volunteered at the festival, and many supported it by buying passes and attending. Renn writes that we hope to build bridges to those who were not Christian and believe the films featured were asking the right questions about the human condition and what was wrong with the world. And he says, exactly. So the author says Renn got that right. And then the partnership drew national attention from the New York Times and Christianity Today. I tried to follow both of these links, by the way, and you have to pay, or you have to have a login, so I decided not to do that. So anyway, it highlights how the two groups were able to work together while disagreeing on some matters. For Renn, our collaboration was a shining example of what Christians could do in the neutral world: act as faithful, non-threatening presences without fear of retribution for our regressive views on LGB. So he says in 2008, T and Q weren't on the list yet. So yeah, that's true. They've been adding to their acronym for a while. And indeed, T, so transgender, was precisely where our partnership with True False took a turn in 2019. So the trans thing was around prior to 2019, and especially if you're in a progressive town on one coast or the other, like if you're part of the area where you're dealing with coastal elites, then you will have dealt with transgenderism. I mean, I remember being a kid and watching Crocodile Dundee, and where he's in New York and he mistakes a trans person. At that time, it was a transvestite is what they were called. But he's in a bar and this transvestite's hitting on him, and they tell him that, hey, that Sheila is a bloke. So trans stuff has been around for quite a long time, and it just depends on where you are. So I'm not sure that this was not an issue at all, or that they wouldn't have known about this. But in any case, good for the crossing. The sermon caused a major controversy in the Columbia community as the crossing stood by their position that there's only two genders. There is no such thing as a gender non-binary gender identity or something like that. And so by 2019, we'd entered Wren's negative world and unwittingly stepped on a landmine that made us untouchables in circles that once welcomed us. Okay, so that seems to prove, just that right there seems to prove that what Aaron Wren was saying was true, was that if you cross a certain line, and that line continues to move, but if you cross a certain line with these people, they would once welcome you as long as you only went so far. As long as you didn't step on their toes or deal with their pet projects, then you could operate with these people. They would let you in, but you had to be careful what you said. So if you were in their house, you play by their rules, and you break one of their rules and you're out. So that seems like the fact that the Overton window of what is acceptable dialogue in public, they were in control of it. That is, the liberals, the LGBTQ people were in control of it, and they stepped outside of what was permissible speech, and so they got blacklisted from the progressive film festival circuit. And then he goes on to say, even though that is the case, at first glance, our story is the perfect encapsulation of Wren's thesis. Progressives are systematically shoving Christians out of public life at great cost to their reputations and livelihoods. Okay, yeah, that's the negative world. You can no longer, like it would have been, and he says different things in here, and we're actually going to switch over to a PDF of this because I have the main things I want to highlight are down below, because he goes from describing what happened to his issue with what Wren had to say about it, and it reveals something about Patrick Miller and the Crossing Church that I think is important. And he goes through this whole thing, and he basically narrows it down and says, well, if you're talking about sex, gender, sexuality, that sort of thing, then the whole thesis of the positive, neutral, and negative worlds holds. But if you go out beyond that, then it doesn't hold anymore. And I think that there's an important intersection here between the idea of negative world and the idea of Third-Wayism. And I think that when Third-Wayism was operating in neutral world, this is a perfect example. Basically, what I'm going to say is that the Crossing Church was a Third-Wayist church. So Third-Wayism is Tim Keller's thesis that it's neither left nor right, it's neither progressive nor conservative, but it's rather Jesus. So if we stick with the gospel, then we can run in between. There's a third way, which is Jesus's way. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But what we have here is the intersection between the failure of Third-Wayism and the reality of being in negative world. And so this guy is saying that that there never really was a positive world or a neutral world. It just depended on the topic that you're dealing with. So as long as you were talking about sexual ethics, then yeah, things flipped from the normative sexual ethic to hey, do your thing, whatever, to now you're a bigot if you don't agree with transgenderism and things like that, or the LGBTQ platform. So this church was basically is a third way church. And there are issues with Third-Wayism that we'll talk about hopefully briefly, but there are a few places in this article that I want to highlight. So this is that point. If we consider the three worlds as a narrow lens for describing the experiences of anyone out of step with the developing sexual ideology of each era, it makes tremendous sense. Perhaps that's why Wren's book is focused primarily on the risks people take for remaining faithful in this one area. There's a bit on critical race theory, a little bit on far-right politics, nothing on greed, materialism, or consumerism. So these are all social justice gospel red flags. This is a social justice church, and that's what Tim Keller pushed. Third-Wayism was basically a way to masquerade social justice gospel as something that was just straight gospel. And so you can't describe it, though. You can't keep the mask on until, forever. You have to bring it out. So here he's showing his cards. Not that greed is good, not that materialism is good, not that consumerism run rampant is good, but it's not bad to enjoy materials. It's not bad to consume what's out there. And he would need to define what he means by these terms. Greed is pretty straightforward. I don't think we would disagree on those. But materialism, consumerism, especially, we have Advent right around the corner as of the recording of this video, and materialism and consumerism always come in as the boogeymen of, the Advent season. So anyway, in truth, it's not just a negative world for evangelicals. It's a negative world for anyone who will not affirm far left ideologies. That's not true. Whether you're Al Mohler or Andrew Sullivan, Rosaria Butterfield, or Barry Weiss. Now, some of this is not a cohesive group. But anyway, that said, the negativity of the post-2015 negative world is most keenly felt by those who, in the pre-2014 world, had easier access to power and influence: middle-class, college-educated, non-coastal evangelicals. So this is where the critical race theory comes in. This is where the power dynamic thing comes in. This is where a racial tinge is put in, where basically the guy's saying, look, if you were white, then you had a pretty good life. And the only reason why you're saying it's negative is because now that you upper middle class white people aren't behind the levers of power anymore, now you're complaining about it. And he goes on to say, for example, it's hard to imagine black or white Christians teaching orthodox views of race in Selma, Alabama in 1964, calling it a positive world. So he's saying that if you were saying that whites and blacks are on an even ontological level, that whites and blacks are both people created in God's image with intrinsic value, so-called Christian segregation academies like Bob Jones University didn't desegregate until 1971. So here again, we're getting on this critical race theory, woke social justice kind of thing, and he's basically saying that, if you're an upper middle class white, it's been negative for a long time, and you've just been too privileged. So here again, the veiled issue of white privilege. So we got the third way. We're just saying gospel things, and it's always been a negative world if you are really gospel focused. Let's see what the next thing, the MAGA-powered negative world. So this is where we get into the real meat of what he's trying to do. This whole thing has been sniping a little bit, saying, well, I agree with this, I agree with that, but it's only if you were an upper middle class white person that this holds. So if you spoke to the Crossings pastors in 2019 and 2020 in the aftermath of the trans sermon, you quickly discover that it wasn't the only or even the most intense source of negativity we were experiencing. Well, he just said it was. He said it was a paradigm shift in the way that they were being treated by the progressives. And so he's already counter-signaled what he says here. Inside and outside our church, there were conservatives who were publicly critical of us for a long list of reasons. We weren't pro-Trump enough. Okay, well, maybe that was a good thing. John Piper came out and he tried to give people permission to vote for Democrats who openly say part of their platform is killing babies, murdering babies, and letting the murderers off the hook, the moms and the doctors who commit the abortions. So there were evangelicals out there who were trying to walk this middle road and giving permission for evil that was going on. So weren't pro-Trump enough? That might be true. Weren't patriotic enough? That might be true. Hey, if you want to be pro-life from the cradle to the grave or from the womb to the tomb, then you need to be pro-life for these immigrants who are coming in. Well, no, if they're illegal and we want to protect our country and we want to maintain an American character, like every other country is allowed to maintain the character of who they are, and we're supposed to highlight and celebrate other ethnic cultures and things like that. Well, how come we're not able to do that? So this might be true as well. We preached about race. Okay, well, what did you preach? I didn't research, but it could be that they preached on racism, which we've already seen that they were kind of throwing shade at the white folks for now that you're uncomfortable, now you're saying it's negative. So I don't know what the substance of the racial preaching was, but if you're highlighting race and saying that people today who are white have some kind of guilt for the things that were done 100 years ago, then yeah, I would also disagree with that. So I don't know, but I would say that there's probably something to that. And and here's an ironic one, weren't anti-trans enough, and later weren't anti-vax enough. All right, so there are a lot of people like Ed Stetzer who were like, go get the jab, go get the jab. And if you love your neighbor, go get the jab. Well, I don't know what this church preached, but based on the character of what I've seen so far, I would say they probably weren't anti-vax enough. All right, so during this time, pastors, not just us, but most I know in the Midwest, took intense heat from both sides. This created many strange experiences. So yeah, this was a weird time for pastors, but you had to know what you were about. If you've already worked these things out in advance, then when the storms come, you stand on stable, firm, biblical ground, and you don't have to complain about the fact that sometimes the cultural milieu is in opposition to your position. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for this. Yeah, you took heat from both sides, but if you knew what you were about and things finally settled out, then you remain standing, and that's not a big deal. This created many strange experiences. In a single day, someone publicly called me a CRT cultural Marxist. Sounds like he is. And someone else called me a white supremacist. Sounds like he's not. In a single week, one family left the church because we weren't pro-BLM. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad you were at least standing firm enough to sort that out. And a different family left because they said we support CRT. It sounds like you do. So here you are in the third way, trying to walk the middle and do a pretty poor job. When you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. That's why you just need to know what you're about. And that's not Third-Wayism. You can be biblical, and then that biblical position will align with some political position. You're not sharpshooting, as we're going to see here in a couple minutes. I'm going to give you a couple resources that take issue with Third-Wayism and really show the flaws in it. But in any case, you're not just standing there sharpshooting in order to please people who have you locked in the progressive gaze. You're actually standing in a position where you might tick some people off, but chances are you will end up fitting into one side more than the other. You ought not to be neither progressive nor conservative, but you ought to be conserving political values across the board. And that's not a big deal. All right. We took hard hits publicly for critiquing the J6 riders. Wonder what that critique was, because we're seeing more and more information come out. That might have been a premature critique. That might have been carrying water for the progressives who used it in order to leverage things against Donald Trump, and we see how that turned out. And we saw the disingenuous actions of our own government to hide the truth, hundreds of federal agents in the crowd, things like that. So we're seeing a lot of issues that if you were intelligent at the time, you would have held back until you got more information. So probably deserve critiquing for that, and critiquing our school district for bringing children to a drag performance without parental permission. What? They didn't get parental permission? No, you should be critiquing them for having a drag performance at all. And then you should be critiquing the parents who gave permission. All right, these experiences led Keith, Simon, and I to write Truth Over Tribe, a pastoral book challenging Christians to overcome partisan divisions on both sides with love and forgiveness. So there it is. There's your Third-Wayism. To overcome partisan division on both sides with love and forgiveness. So this is saying, go the third way. Just love, just forgive. Well, there has to be some kind of substance to what you're doing. You can't just love and forgive. Those words have definitions. Those words have parameters, and the Bible tells us what those things are. What does it mean to forgive? What does it mean to love on a level that God permits, that God mandates? And so it's not this soft, mushy, middle of the road, let's just look at everybody the same way. You don't just say that both the left and the right are equally malicious in different ways or something like that, and that the middle is always the best place to be. No. On a pastoral level, the public attacks from the right were challenging, but the personal conversations were the most painful. I had people whom I counseled through marital distress, catastrophic loss, and awful sickness who turned against me because I wouldn't affirm a right-wing conspiracy theory or stop teaching about ethnic reconciliation. And then this, which is hard to do if you teach through Ephesians, Galatians, Romans, Luke, Revelation, etc. Okay, so you could say a lot about that. Maybe in a different video I'll talk about the idea of ethnic reconciliation in the scriptures and what that means and how we load that term with a lot of modern political stuff that wasn't part of what they were getting at in the scriptures. They thought about ethnicities differently. They thought about identity, national identity differently. And so it's not even analogous to the way we think about it today. And we we eisegetically load in a bunch of stuff that just would not have been in the minds of the people or the biblical authors at the time. But you see here how he starts to make this shift. And before he was saying neither right nor left, but now he's saying the thing that hurt me most, after I'd done so much for these people, and they turned against me because I wouldn't affirm a right-wing conspiracy theory. So what was the right-wing conspiracy theory? What was it? He could have said, I wouldn't affirm that the lizard people are, trafficking children in the basement of pizza shops. Like, he could have said what that right-wing conspiracy was, but this is really vague. Right-wing conspiracy theory is a left-wing talking point. And then, or stop teaching about ethnic reconciliation. So did he have somebody in his church who was either a black supremacist or a white supremacist? And did they need to be reconciled to one another? Or is it the fact that he was picking up, again, progressive leftist talking points and acting as if that applied to every person in the audience, most likely upper middle class white people? I'm just trying to follow the pattern here. Now, this is his own self-description too. So I'm just going off of what he's saying, and I'm trying to track with what he's presenting here. When you strip away all the globalizing abstractions like journalism, Hollywood, government, and big business, so I don't know why you would strip that away. It has a purpose in there. And focus instead on the on-the-ground experience of local institutional leaders. Well, not journalism, not Hollywood, not government, not big business. What institutions are we talking about? You will discover that their negative world is caused both by a left-wing progressive movement and a right-wing populist movement. I disagree. Based on what you've said before, I don't think that you believe this. And here again, this is the third way that just doesn't work for anybody. Negative world has always been around, not in the way that Aaron Renn describes it. So again, this is taking what Aaron Renn has defined, and then it's redefining it and then presenting it as if he's wrong. But that equivocation is the problem. You have changed the definition of the point that Aaron Renn was making, and then you're saying that he's wrong, and you're using that to defend yourself and saying, no, we didn't move into negative world because we're too right-wing. We promise, we're still progressive, or we're still friendly to the progressives. So this is where that comes out. Let's see. Actually, this is where it comes out. If we come to believe that we live in a uniquely negative era for Christianity that outstrips the hardship of previous eras, it has a tendency to justify extreme measures in the present that ignores Jesus' plain teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. I don't think Renn falls into this trap. Most of his advice is standard, transformational, fair, which I agree with. So why did you write this article? I think you wrote this article to pander to the left. That's what I think. But I suspect many of his admirers will continue to use negative world framing to buttress bad ethics. Okay, so there's the point. There's the real point. Remember, those middle-class white people who lost the levers of power are just angry, and they're just using this negative world framing as an excuse to be mean. The idea of a uniquely negative world puts Christians on the defensive. The problem with defenses is that they know what they're against, not what they're for. Okay, do you believe this? Well, now you're saying, but Babylon is always Babylon. So you're saying that the world has always been negative, that the church is always on the defensive. And then you say that the people who think that they're always on the defensive are going to know what they're against and not what they're for. Well, that's who you are. How are you different than the people that you're criticizing, other than the fact that you want to pander to the progressives and the leftists rather than sticking with the scripture and realizing that the scriptures tend to be more in line with the conservative political movement? If you look at the party platforms of the two main parties that are active in the United States right now, I agree that the left is not in line with Scripture. And I agree that the right is not in line with Scripture. But here's the problem. If you are a biblical Christian, then the issue is not that you need to be in the center of the left and the right. The problem is that you need to be farther to the right than the current right is. You need to be more conservative. You need to be more retrograde, fundamentalist than the conservatives are. The problem is not that you need to be in the middle. The problem is that you need to get out from between the two and be to the far right in a lot of these things. And, far right or right wing has gotten a bad connotation because you say, well, that means that you are a diehard nationalist instead of a Christian, that you are a bigot instead of a Christian, that you are a fiscal conservative instead of a Christian, or however you want to do it. But what I'm saying is that even the political conservative party has become left of what true center is. So we as Christians, if we're really going to do something, if we're going to go to the third way, we need to retake the center and say, you guys are all too far left. And this church actually wants to get in the middle and then move towards the left rather than getting out of the whole thing. Their Third-Wayism is kind of a mockery of what the true third way would be. So when you realize that Jesus expected his followers to be joyful outsiders in every era, sojourners, pilgrims, exiles, you become much less reactive to the negative world around you. So you're too reactive. Okay, well, how did they react to getting kicked out of this festival? What was their reaction? It wasn't easy, but it was simple. Jesus told us what to do. Love. So going back to the reason why they were kicked out. They were kicked out because they took a biblical position on transgender ideology. How did they respond to being kicked out of the festival? We took to the internet to thank the festival for our past partnerships. I and others wrote long social media posts sincerely expressing why we love the festival and encouraging fellow church members to continue attending in the future. In a private conversation with one of the festival's leaders, he said to me, it was a masterclass on grace. I wanted to take credit, but I couldn't. I replied that we're merely students of the master. So they got kicked out of the festival for standing their ground. They turned around and they sought to ingratiate themselves to the people who said, we don't like what God has what has been professed about what God tells you as Christians. I don't think pandering to the rank unbelievers who hate God and hate his design for humanity is what Jesus would have wanted us to do. When Jesus was, when he was in arguments with the scribes and the Pharisees, and the scribes and the Pharisees accused him of blasphemy for saying that he could forgive sins. Jesus didn't excuse himself from the conversation and then publicly thank the Pharisees for being able to speak for a little while in the public square, and then wish them well and tell his followers, okay, keep going to the Pharisees, keep listening to what they have to say. We get it. We're in an era of tension. You just got to love them. And hopefully they'll forgive us. We'll forgive them. We'll all just be forgiven. Like this is not what Jesus did. He stood in a position unapologetically. And instead, this is basically a kind of like a passive apology, a different kind of apology. Hey, thanks for just letting us be a part of it. And we're so happy. And we don't want to burn any bridges. But I don't know, did they also say, but we're going to stick to our guns on this trans thing? You guys kicked us out, but just so you know, you're going to end up in hell if you keep following the same road. And for him to, before I move on and give some good resources on how to learn a little bit more about why Third Way is kind of a bad way to go. These guys said, we're going to take a position on the trans issue and we're going to preach it biblically. And then they got booted out of the Cool Kids Club, so they can't go to the film festival anymore. And instead of saying, okay, you see where we stand, they don't want us here, let's kick the dust off of our heels and let's head out. Their advice to their congregants was, keep going back, keep going back. The people that just rejected you, keep going back. And what do you think they were? What was the parameter that allowed them to go back? Don't speak in his name. Don't bring up the trans thing anymore. just go along to get along. I don't think that we should just go along to get along. I don't think that that's being a student of the master. And when it comes to the positive world, neutral world, negative world, we do need to use all means at our disposal in order to be able to get the gospel out there. There is a cacophony of viewpoints out there, especially now. I'm making this video. There are 15,000 other videos being made right this moment, probably in a 10-mile radius of where I'm at. So if we expect to continue to get the true gospel message out there, then we can't be pandering to unbelievers to try to be a part of their cool kids club where you're not allowed to say certain things. If there's an opportunity for you to participate with co-belligerents in something that is biblically grounded, so if you want to be part of a sidewalk ministry that does outreach to families who are heading into an abortion mill to kill their baby, and you go out there and there are atheists who have they're humanists, and so they have a high view of human value, and then there are Catholics who are who are Orthodox. I say Orthodox, not Eastern Orthodox, but are Catholics, Roman Catholics through and through. Everything the Pope says they go with. Everything that comes out of the Vatican is like, the gospel truth. And then you're out there with Eastern Orthodox, and maybe you're out there with some unificationists, and you're all on mission to stop these babies from being killed. Okay, that's called being a co-belligerent, but you're not endorsing what the people are doing. But if you go out there and somebody says, turn to the unificationist church and be saved, and you say, yeah, we can go along to get along, instead of saying, no, don't turn to them. That's a cult. To come to us, like you've chosen life, now come to us for the truth. Or you just bite your tongue and you let people walk off into destruction. You can't do that. There's a line from co-belligerency to endorsing, tacitly or passively endorsing because you're not speaking up. So, yeah, go into the public square. Yeah, be co-belligerents where you can be, but don't pander to people that stand against God. Don't pander to Antichrist so that you can continue to be part of the conversation. If they don't want to talk to you, if they won't hear you, the biblical prescription is shake the dust off your heels as a testimony against them and move on to the next place. So no, don't go to the film festival where they say you can't talk about trans stuff. Just quit. All right, so a few places where you can get a recent introduction where I think these people are seeing the reason why the third way stuff is crashing in the midst of negative world is because the world doesn't want you. You can't be a third wayist because the world just doesn't want you. And you can't pander enough to please them without basically just giving in on your Christian values. So one YouTuber that has been dealing with this for a little bit is A.D. Robles, and he has 3 videos. Gavin Ortland is kind of a progressive guy. He goes to the same church as where his dad, Ray Ortland, is, and where Russell Moore is. They're progressive dudes. They're liberal Christians. They're not biblical Christians. They'll go with the third way thing. Russell Moore has said that anybody who's a Christian nationalist or leans in that direction is satanic, and that it bears no good fruit and things like that. But when it comes to Gavin Ortland's all about critiquing your own tribe fairly. He never touches his own tribe. They're also side B affirming, so you can be Gavin Ortland's church. You can be gay and Christian as long as you don't go out and act on your lusty gay urges. But that can be part of your identity. God gave you that identity. Those urges are part of your identity, and you can own it. And God never saves you from that. Regeneration doesn't stop that. And so they're in all kinds of liberal stuff beyond just Third-Wayism. But A.D. Robles takes Gavin Ortland and a video that he did. I think it's not a brand new video, but I think A.D. is just touching on this subject. Again, the intersection of where Third Way is failing and negative world is being identified. And so this is a good good channel. Look at these videos. Gavin Ortland makes his appeal to me. So this is part 1. Seriously considering Gavin's second appeal, part 2. And then Gavin's final appeal, my consideration and rejection. So you know what you're going to get. That's 1. But you can get good commentary there. This is more of like a pop culture. It doesn't get deep into the weeds kind of thing. This one is the Lone Bulwark. And this is a good place to go for political theology. And so let's see. This is the official YouTube channel of Stephen Wolfe, the author of The Case for Christian Nationalism. So you can see, again, the direction it's coming from. You've probably picked up on the direction I'm coming from. But this one especially, Gavin Ortland's Third Way, you can listen to this on 1 1/4 or 1.5 speed, and Stephen Wolfe does a great job of really punching holes in the claims of Third-Wayism. And I think that the way that Stephen Wolfe describes Third-Wayism is a really helpful way of doing it, because he says that somebody who is part of Third-Wayism isn't really professing a theology, but it's basically a tactic or a methodology that is used to ingratiate oneself to the coastal elites, to the liberal coastal elite. So Tim Keller was the one who kind of coined this idea of the third way, and then his followers, people that agreed with him, have kind of carried it on and developed it more. But it's not that there is a theological or doctrinal position that is Third-Wayism, like Calvinism or Arminianism or something like that, but rather it's just a methodology of sharpshooting political issues within the left and the right so that you can ingratiate yourself to the cultural elites on the West and East Coast. And so I think that's a pretty good idea, that it isn't actually a doctrine or a theology. It's not a systematic in that way, but it's just a way to do business so that you can look good to the cool kids. And then finally, this is a good one. This is John Harris. This is Conversations That Matter. He does a podcast, and it's also, he puts it up on YouTube and probably Rumble and stuff like that. But this is a recent one. You see it was from 1 day ago. It is October 20th, 2025 right now. But this is from a day ago, and he and Meg Basham are talking. Meg is active in the Turning Point USA speaking circuit, and so she has firsthand experience of what it's like out there with the young people, and what she's a culture reporter, and she does freelance stuff, and she works for the Daily Wire. But anyway, she wrote a book called Shepherds for Sale, where she calls out a lot of these progressive Christians who are doing the bidding of leftists for the sake of finance and fame and things like that. J.D. Greer's one of those. Russell Moore's one of those. Gavin Ortland's one of those. And so anyway, she has firsthand knowledge, a lot of background information, and she's been part of the dialogue between the left and the right for quite a while. And so in this particular episode of Conversations That Matter, the podcast, they debunk Tim Keller's Third Way, and from personal experience, Meg Basham is able to talk about the changes that she's seen over the past decade, and especially since 2020, which you remember in the article that 2020 was like the tipping point for what happened here with Patrick Miller and what he's talking about. So in any case, there are some good resources for you there. A.D. Robles, Stephen Wolfe, John Harris, Meg Basham, if you want to get more from the right side, from the conservative side of things. But I think this was a helpful article just to show that the Third-Wayists are not going to go down easy. Just like Gavin Ortland, Patrick Miller wants to frame this as we are neither this nor that, but in reality, they are leftist leaning, and there probably is a spectrum of where these kind of things fall. I'm glad that they made a firm stance on the transgender thing, but how come? What was it to them that the LGB? They said LGB was all there was. Well, if you have bisexual, that's a spiritual, that's a sin kind of an immaterial kind of transgenderism kind of thing. But in reality, whether just because it crossed the line from something that's intangible to tangible, from spiritual to physical, that's where they drew the line. But the problem is that they didn't draw the line soon enough, and yeah, so they're on the left. They're defending the fact that they're on the left, and they're trying to tear down this notion of a negative world, and it's not what Aaron Renn was describing based on his own words that I've seen in his talks and things like that. So anyway, interesting article. Really showed their cards. Hope this was helpful. God bless.